Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and our guest today is Will Wiles. I'm happy to announce that I just became a total super fan of his. He's the author of three novels, and I'm going to bring them up here as big props behind me. Um, Care of Wooden Floors, The Way In, and his latest is Plume. These books are familiar in their milieu, but also very, very strange in their world building. They are very funny. They're very disorienting. They have exquisite prose. My mother always warned me to stay with good prose. Will is indeed a very gifted writer. Now, if folks here in the room, and we have a full room, are starting to doze off because they're like, Draxter, you're expecting me, you're expecting me to read something and listen to a boring lecture about the building blocks of contemporary literary fiction. Fear not, because there is also suspense, there's horror, and there's a lot of drugs. Will's debut novel, there is a cat that is murdered by the lid of a grand piano. There's a cleaning woman that is also murdered. In The Way In, an actual hotel does not the murder people as much as it absorbs them, humans. A little bit like the Borg, I guess, in Star Trek. And in the current novel Plume, there is a journalist at the center of the story with quite a bit of an alcohol problem, and he has his London flat collapse on him a little bit after he hallucinates seeing a cockatoo, which is actually a plastic bag caught in the backyard tree. So this is what Will is writing about, and I welcome Will Wiles to the Second Life Book Club. He's here perched on the sofa opposite of me. Welcome, Will Wiles.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for
Now,
coming.
you thank you for coming. I'm seriously addicted to your books now, and I read two in German. I think the translation is fantastic, although I can't evaluate it. I don't have them in English at the same time. I'm going to ask about it later, the relationship to the translator. But first of all, how are you feeling in this rather bland environment of avatars here compared to your crazy books? I mean, this may look like complete normality to you. I guess
Uh,
compared to, I'm not saying, I mean, obviously you're not living in the world of your books, but they got to come from somewhere.
yeah, like you said earlier, the my second novel, The Way In, is in some ways a novel about telepresence, and a kind of the limitations of meeting face to face. It's about a man who thinks that face to face meetings are essentially obsolete and can be done away with, among other things. He's got a number of weird beliefs, which was when it was published in 2016 wasn't it was a I didn't know how up to date that would be in 2020, but
It is absolutely
the
up to date. I mean, it is actually
yeah
this part of the plot is being discussed every day in my
yeah
world. Yeah.
and my third novel, Plume, is in part about social media, although it's not kind of
Mhm.
set on social media, as it were. I mean, it's about the sort of paranoia that creeps in from the internet and the difference between the online self that we project and the real self. It's quite weird seeing my books flash up very large like that. Anyway, and so in many
I
ways,
can
this is
also
kind of like the
duplicate.
perfect environment because um, I'm getting steadily walled in from my point of view this way. Um, it's sometimes how it feels working on them. But yeah, I mean, it's the ideal environment, really. I mean, the ongoing kind of merger between the virtual and the real is one of my kind of recurring interests.
Absolutely. I mean, this is all, I mean, your books are a lot about authenticity and like you said, I mean, the one thing, of course, that I have to mention here because Professor Tom Berlsdorf, who has written several books on virtual worlds, he would I hear his voice in my head all the time. I did a documentary on his work once, and I'm doing another one on him, and he does not he does not like to call things virtual versus real. He likes to distinguish between virtual and physical. So because he talks about the when he talks about digital worlds, the interaction that we're having right now, that I have with you and with the audience, is very real. But it is happening in the digital realm. So that's one of his pet peeves. Every panel he is on, every interview, and people say, "Well, a real versus virtual." Says, "Well, no, 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 no. What we do here in virtual worlds is very real. It
Yeah.
can be very authentic." And a matter of fact, we'll talk about it. I would say The Way In is probably my favorite. I mean, all three books are really, really excellent, and I encourage everyone to pick them up and read them. But The Way In, to me, is really, uh, yeah, I don't know, but we'll talk about it later. Why it is my favorite? Because then I feel I devalue Plume, because Plume, with the social media aspect, that is also so sort of eye-opening when we observe our interaction in the online versus offline world, and it's just not that clear cut and black and white. What is a real interaction and what is sort of a conformist or PR, laden interaction, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, well,
Now,
Plume's kind of like a sort of study of authenticity and the kind of limitations of authenticity. It's I mean, at its center is this sort of hipster cult novelist who's kind of obsessed with having a kind of authentic experience. He's known for this kind of very gritty, down to earth, not writing about the city, and is the kind of feels that the city has become a very glossy kind of simulacrum of itself, and want thinks that he can kind of escape that into a sort of an authentic version of the city, by pursuing its kind of gritty underside, a sort of psychogeographical project.
mhm.
And Really, the book's kind of picking holes in that, showing what a silly idea it is. I mean, it's this sort of hipsterish obsession with things being more artisanal or authentic
Yeah,
than
absolutely. And in many ways, and I mean, this is about London, and we lived for almost 20 years a little bit south of San Francisco. And San Francisco and many cities in the world have the same problem with gentrification. When people come in, uh, who have the money to live in these cities, they drive out what they believe is authentic, and then sort of the streamlined version of what was authentic comes in, and the people who drive that dynamic bemoan the fact that the authenticity is gone, while they're actually driving the bus of that, right?
yeah. Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's an often remark kind of feature of gentrification is that people are drawn to live in a city by an idea of it, and they come, and their first impressions are immensely vivid, and at the longer they spend in a place, they become more accustomed with it, and things change, and it feels to them that this sort of timeless, authentic vision of the city is slipping away, and it was whatever it was when on the eve of their arrival. In fact, they've arrived in a place that's in constant flux, that's always changing, that's always evolving, and they arrived with a probably a not wholly realistic view of it, and what's what's changing is their own perception. I mean, London and San Francisco are places that have gentrified. I'm not saying gentrification doesn't happen, because it does on a massive scale, but broadly, the people who are writing about the experience of it aren't necessarily the people who have been at its sharpest end. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it makes living in the city very expensive. And one of the things I wanted to do in Plume was to kind of study the sort of precarity of that existence, what the narrator calls the London question, the fact that you're constantly looking around the people around you, and wondering how on earth they're able to stay in London.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
they make it, how they make ends meet, essentially, how they support what the city takes in money terms. But
And that's
at
a
the same
really
time,
interesting.
it's
No, no, go ahead, go ahead.
At the same time, it's also acknowledging the fact that there's a whole largely unvoiced victim class to gentrification who are driven out entirely and are no longer there to to complain about it, if you see what I mean. Whose homes have been torn down and replaced, and who have simply been dispersed to the winds.
That's another really interesting sort of subtext of Plume is who writes these stories, because the main character is a journalist in this lifestyle magazine, and as you're saying, oftentimes these stories, and they're maybe, oftentimes they're very well-meaning writers and journalists, but they're also very often of the same class of people that they're writing about, and then they may go out and get a little glimpse of the hardship of people, but the story itself does not originate within the social sphere of the people that these other people write about. I mean, that's a huge problem in my mind.
Yeah, I mean Pierce, the guy who the novelist I mentioned, who's sort of the antagonist of the
Well, let
novel.
me set it up real quick. So we
Yeah.
have a journalist here, Jack Bick, and we're going right into Plume. I was gonna save this for later, but let's
Oh,
do
no,
this.
well, no, I mean we can start somewhere else if you want. I don't mind. It's your
I
house.
didn't even do the housekeeping. Well, all your stuff is about houses, and I have you on my run sheet. Don't forget the housekeeping. Isn't that ironic, Will? We're totally into it. I got to do the housekeeping real quick because people will chastise me. Let's do this real quick. The Second Life Book Club, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. The island is open 24/7, as you know. We will actually premiere a museum of all the past guests with little audio samples of their reading in about 2 weeks, which will be on a different platform here. There will be a teleporter. I'm very excited about this. When you come here to the book club, please be kind to the newbies, to the lapsed readers. Don't be a snob. Befriend them, be kind, recommend a book. The reading list will be published on bookshop.org. And after the show, we just had somebody teleport on stage here, Xiomi. Hello, Xiomi. Welcome to the book club. Please take a seat. And if you don't find one, you can also stand, or you can sit here. I don't mind. Big thanks to my team, Strawberry, Linden, Brett, Patch, Linden, the Molds, Marianne McCann customized the venue, Kralos customizes the avatar, Silas makes custom avatars, and of course Isabel Sharon, who is filling in for Strawberry on camera. Now, we were right in the talking about Plume. There is a celebrated novelist who is disappearing a little bit after he got mugged. Pierce, and then Jack is, and Will, I will ask you this later, how much of you is in Jack, because all your protagonists have a real issue with follow through. They're master procrastinators. It is absolutely unbelievable. As you know, as everything collapses around them, and they get ample opportunity to, they have friends that want to help them, but they procrastinate, and the disaster just keeps coming. There is a self-sabotage thing going on here. But let's pick it up where we were. The relationship between Pierce, the famed novelist here in London, who feels London is not authentic anymore. We need the authentic experience. And then Jack, the lifestyle columnist who has a huge alcohol problem. What's going on in Plume?
Yeah, so the as you mentioned, I mean, Jack, the narrator of the novel, is a extremely doomed journalist whose functional alcoholism is steadily getting the better of him and destroying his ability to produce work on time and indeed produce work at all. And it feels that he's constantly about maybe a week ahead of getting fired from his magazine, his lifestyle magazine, which is struggling in what was already a very challenging environment before the pandemic for magazines. And he gets the opportunity to interview a reclusive novelist called Oliver Pierce, who wrote an immensely successful, a surprise bestseller non-fiction book about getting mugged, about the experience of getting mugged. And after writing this book, promptly disappeared from view, stopped doing interviews, and deleted his social media accounts and so on, and has been largely off the scene for 2 years. And Jack sees potential to relaunch his career with this interview, particularly when Pierce reveals why he wants to be interviewed, which is the fact that he invented the book about being mugged. It was a creation of his, a fraud, and he wants to come clean, but he wants to come clean in a way that doesn't destroy his career.
Mm-hmm.
And while trying to figure out whether this can be done, the two men are kind of drawn into this very unusual, very surreal, part friendship, part exercise in mutual destruction, basically.
And Jack is also a big fan of Pierce. And, I mean, I don't know if somebody ever said this to you. For a very long time during Plume, I was thinking of Fight Club, and I thought, maybe, is this the same person? Is this a fidget of Jackson? Is the successful novelist that Jack admires so much, and then he comes into contact, and like you said, they go on this journey. Is this the same person? Is this the same premise as Fight Club, essentially?
Well, I think that they're.
I know it is not. Let's spoil.
Yeah.
Let's spoil it. It's open to interpretation. I would say it's not, but I was thinking, and don't get me wrong, I was not reading this and go like, "Oh my God, Will Wiles ripped off Fight Club." Not at all. I was reminded of the same feeling that I got in Fight Club, and it wouldn't have mattered to me if you came out with that, which you don't. In terms of the quality of the book at all, it completely stands on its own. So I want to make that very clear. I'm not suggesting it's some sort of a ripoff or anything.
Well, to be clear, they are different people. I mean, that's not that's not how it unfolds. They're not the same person, but they are kind of mirror images in a way, in that they're both they're both kind of essentially sort of one step away from getting cancelled. They both filled their. I mean, Pierce is the perpetrator of a major literary fraud, having essentially invented a memoir, and Jack has drunkenly filled his pieces with so much plagiarism and borrowed quotes and so on that he's convinced he's going to get found out eventually, and his whole career is going to collapse. And so they both feel that their destruction is already written, and they're both trying to stay a step ahead of it, as it were.
I was actually going to read. Let's do this, Will. You want to hop over to The Purged and read a little bit of Plume? And while you're doing that, I'm going to read a tiny little excerpt of it myself, because one of the things that I love about Plume is the workplace that you describe. And it is a workplace that I'm very familiar with as a former radio journalist, a news director of a small station, and the type of pressure to deliver on deadline. Like you said, with the main protagonist Jack, there's huge issues of journalistic ethics. He makes up stuff. He lifts stuff from older interviews, puts them in there. And there's many snafus where he goes out and his recorder is not running, and then he loses his voice recorder and all sorts of things. So I got a little bit PTSD of my early days in radio back at KPFK in Los Angeles. And I want to read this because there's a very short excerpt where he talks about editing, what the journey from initial interview, and this is specifically about profiling people. So this is one specific format that he is tasked with at this magazine, is to profile celebrities of various sorts, a real estate agent, the writer there, and also the other protagonist, Ollie, who is the CEO of a startup, of a social media startup, which is a very important part of the book. And here he writes about, here he talks about Jack, the narrator, the functioning alcoholic. about um, interview and profile. People have no idea how much they say in the course of a normal conversation. Talk to someone for an hour, and the transcript can approach 5,000 words. Trim away all the worthless yes and ums and I thinks. Cut all the bits where they're ordering a drink or asking their PR how much time they have left. And unless they are the worst kind of drone celebrity, you will still have far more quotable material that can be squeezed into the 2 to 3,000 words you have been given to write. So you select, you edit, and here the interview stops being photography and becomes impressionist painting. 10 quotes that make the subject look generous, warm, and inspiring can be found in the transcript. The same transcript can also yield 10 quotes that make them sound weary, bitter, and self centered. The person remains the same, what they said remains the same, but they are seen through a series of funhouse mirrors, appearing first hypertrophied, then stunted, then undulating. So this is from Will Wiles' Plume, and makes me feel a little bit defensive because there's nothing wrong with impressionist painting, Will, is there?
No, but the point is that the idea. I mean, I mentioned authenticity, but part of this is about the
Yeah.
entire thing is about grappling with the truth. It's about
Yes.
the idea that an interview, that 2,000 words of journalism can be a perfect truth is slightly misleading. There is a kind of an extent to which it's all a hall of mirrors. There's many different ways that the truth could be told, if you see what I mean. It may be true, but the same, depending on the slant of the interviewer, the same material could be projected in two different ways,
I
or
could
three
not
different
agree.
ways, or four different ways.
Yeah.
It's Borges, the Argentinian author, said something about this in the in one of his essays about you can imagine a biography of Michelangelo that doesn't do anything, that doesn't mention the art, or if you have a finite number of facts in someone's life, if there are 20,000 facts in someone's life, and you use fact 177 and 344 and so on and so forth, and not the others, then you paint one picture and another picture could be painted. You can't paint a total picture. You can't understand a whole truth in a piece of writing.
I,
It
I,
shows
I,
you a
I'm sorry. I could not agree more, Will. I'm sorry. I got to step on you here because I could not agree more. And literally, I had this discussion 3 times today with various people, and as you point out, and I think in the other novels you put that to the test as well. It's really a question of media literacy. So the solution here is not to, I think, vilify specific media outlets. I mean, there are media outlets that should be vilified, of course, for what they do if they, do malicious misinformation. But there's just not enough media literacy sort of training in schools and even for adults. I mean, we're inundated with media, but most people, and I don't blame them either. They just don't know how to sort of dissect these things and have sort of a critical look at it. Yeah.
yeah. I think to be honest, rather damagingly, because I think because they feel that their profession is under siege, and they're not
Yes.
wrong about that, and it's a valuable profession. It has a lot, a vital role in society. But journalists have a kind of a tendency to set themselves up as sort of paladins of a shining, inarguable truth
Yep.
in a sea of lies, and get very annoyed by more sort of postmodern kind of takes on it, like the one I just laid out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're exactly. They
And
jump the.
whereas in fact they should be trying to engage with a more sophisticated, that's what you get taught when you learn journalism
Yep.
or anything else is this sophistication. But in Britain, I don't know if this is the case elsewhere, but in Britain, media studies is derided as a degree, as a discipline. It's considered to be a joke, but it's possibly the most important and vital skill that children could learn at the moment. The ability to assess and evaluate sources and understand the purpose and nature of what they're listening to and reading. So I think that journalists, by kind of cladding themselves in shining armor and setting forth as knights of truth, don't necessarily do themselves any favors.
They set themselves up, unfortunately, from attacks, especially, of course, from the right. I mean, primarily, exactly because of that. That attitude, generally speaking. I mean, we're overgeneralizing a little bit. I couldn't agree more. And then oftentimes they also go on the defensive here, and all the people that we have running around in the world screaming the press is lying to us. Well, they're not totally wrong. I mean, they're misguided in where their critique lies, but the general sentiment and the aggrievement has to be addressed, but in much more productive ways. And one of them is to elevate media studies in the ecosystem of academic studies and rigor, and just a lot higher. I mean, in the US, I worked for a national public radio for a long time, and they were traditionally, from the very beginning, under constant attack from the right that they are too left. And they would, they would move much more to the right because of that critique. The critique was ludicrous, frankly. Maybe in the very beginning there was a little bit kernel of truth, but uh, they did not address this properly. Instead, they adhered to a false sort of objectivity, which is another big problem. But I'm completely digressing here. Although this is a super interesting subject, we should talk about it for 3 hours. Do you want to read, Will?
Sure. Yeah, I thought that given we had spoken about gentrification, I'd read a scene from about halfway through Plume. I mentioned that having admitted to inventing his tale of getting brutally mugged and kind of being taken by surprise by how successful it ended up being and unable to walk it back, Oliver Pierce wants to somehow get away with it. He wants to come clean without it damaging his career, without people destroying him. And the scheme that they alight on, or Oliver is very keen on, to do this, is that he wants to get mugged. He wants to get mugged for real, as a way of kind of making amends, as a way of saying, well, I'm sorry that I invented a crime happening to me, but I've actually gone out and made sure that it has happened to me for real. So now it's real. And because he doesn't necessarily, Jack doesn't particularly think that this is a hugely sane idea, but does think it makes for a good story. So they go along with each other. So they decide to go down to a place that they both, in their kind of middle-class imaginations, regard as a spooky and threatening place, which is a large housing estate in Elephant and Castle in London. But they find that it is not as they imagined. We had made a mistake, misremembered it, given the driver the wrong destination, replaced one memory with another. We crossed under the railway bridge, expecting dripping shadows and mute monoliths, a place taxis won't take you. The first thing we saw was a line of taxis, orange lights on, waiting for trade. Behind that, carnival brightness and music. Galvanized security fences screened the boundary of the estate, but it was not deserted or closed. The fences were strung with fairy lights and bunting, and in front of us was a scaffolding arch, with a name spelled out in weathered letters, reclaimed from other signs, Winter Zone. Beyond the arch was a prim favela built out of shipping containers that had been painted in acid colours, a miniature city on a bed of play park wood chips. In the distance was another splash of coloured lights, machine movement, crashing and cheering. What is this? Pierce said, horror in his eyes, upturned face bathed in light. I knew. I had heard of Winter Zone. People had been talking about it in the office. There had even been a brief piece about it in the most recent issue of the magazine. A groundbreaking experiment in interactive urban renewal, Urbanism as entertainment, shopping, music, film, and street food. No one does food indoors anymore. It's all street food. I just hadn't realized that it was here. The gates were guarded by a line of glittery young people in black North Face, each bearing a tablet computer. They smiled and reassured us that the entrance was free if you accepted the shared space conduct fist bump. And I think my bruised face drew a suspicious look. We each bumped fists with one of the pad people. Bumped fists, not faces. Pad people. And agreed that our conduct would abide by the terms and conditions that were laid out on the website, accessible from the URL found on the wristbands we were issued. Isn't this where the big council estate used to be? Pierce asked one of the gate guardians, a bright-eyed girl with pink spiky hair. She raised both eyebrows, pleased by the question. Right here, she said. You're looking for the Renuosaurs. They run till midnight. You can catch them next to where we're projecting the film. She gestured across the container village, where the site was bounded by a giant advertising hoarding, several stories high and several streets long. But although it was covered in advertising, it was not a billboard, but one of the slab blocks of the estate, mummified in taut white plastic wrap. Slogans were splashed across the giant canvas. Winter Zone, brought to you by Castle Park. Yesterday to the day after tomorrow. A state-of-the-art development of new homes to own or rent. Join us and take part in a vibrant celebration of the transformation of urban renewal. And much more of the same, alternating with a tasting platter of corporate logos, the local authority, property developers, building contractors, a hedge fund, a Singaporean pension fund, estate agents and others. We wandered onto the festival site, numb, staring, our plan temporarily forgotten. In the distance were the amped cries of Sam Neill and Laura Dern battling dinosaurs against a John Williams score, and another splintering crash, which brought a round of applause. The crash was not part of the film. Closer at hand, the music was familiar, wispy female vocals over a twangy banjo, and although I knew it, had heard it in adverts, I couldn't place it. Shop fronts in the shipping containers dispensed artfully sloppy burgers and cashmere sweaters. A spoken word poet was denouncing austerity to an audience of 5 people reclined on velour-covered cushions in a yurt. Visitors milled around us, a crowd heavy in beards and caps and stiff vintage military overcoats. The women had mastered the miraculous balance of dress that would work just as well pitching a phone game to venture capitalists in Dalston as it would at one of my mother's WI meetings. It was 11ish at night, but the shared space conduct fist bump was holding effortlessly. No one was visibly drunk, though most held bottles of microbrew, many swaying them casually from the barest contact of index finger and thumb. I saw 2 buggies with babies slumbering peacefully inside. Pierce muttered, but he couldn't even bring himself to finish his profanity. He had not closed his mouth since we arrived, and appeared distraught. What's this music? I asked. It was bothering me, so obviously a song I knew, but just out of reach. Sweet Child of Mine, Pierce said, but a cover. On the inside I was rejoicing. I shared Pierce's disgust at this Mumford-infested travesty, but had at least shut down his bizarre plan to get attacked. I might even be able to get a drink. We could sit down and I could record a few essential quotes on my phone, and I might even be able to write a few lines tomorrow, enough to get Eddie and Polly off my back, some red meat to throw into the Monday meeting on Friday. Not much risk of getting mugged here, I said, trying to conceal my relief. Robbed, maybe, if we buy a beer. Pierce came to a sudden stop, feet scrunching on wood chips. We'd reached a clearing in the midst of these shipping containers, surrounded by boutiques, bar fronts, and Brazil-themed fast food outlets run by ex-financiers. Cumin and turmeric wafted through the night air, and there was a burst of sizzling as something was flipped on a grill. A nearby group burst into educated laughter, making a big physical display of it, slapping legs and patting each other on the back. One, overcome with mirth, took off his flat cap and scratched his shaved head. When I was younger, in the 80s or 90s, this place was, Pierce began. You just wouldn't come here. He waved his arm at the banner dominating the clearing. Village Green at Castle Gardens. Community will be at the heart of everything we do. Let's get a drink, I said. Talk. Yeah, said Pierce inattentively. We will, but I want to see. We crossed the clearing. Chalkboards advertised henna tattoos and curried goat burritos and wild-style graffiti masterclasses from street art professionals. Under a thicket of patio heaters, a young man in a pork pie hat, stripped down to his string vest, and was languorously grooving to the music, as if this was London fields at the height of summer. What is this music? I asked Pierce. It was the same artist, or similar, lisping and strumming away winsomely. Lithium, Pierce said, a cover. Before, our view of the far half of the long slab block of flats had been obscured by a tower of scaffolding, which supported floodlights, speakers, and a climbing wall. The container street spread out into another large open area, larger than the village green, thinly filled with a crowd lounging on branded picnic blankets and deck chairs under traditional groves of patio heaters. Many were sitting on stumps of fallen trees. Above them, projected onto the skin of the shrimp-wrapped council block, Jurassic Park was into its final half hour. But the crowd's attention was divided. Although many were watching the film, more were focused on where the plastic dermis of the block ended in a ragged, twisting line. Behind a cordon of polished hoardings, under spotlights, 2 demolition machines were tearing at the slab block, ripping it down piece by piece. Their long jointed necks were wrapped in strings of coloured lights, and the hydraulic jaws that were chewing through the ferroconcrete were painted to resemble dinosaur heads. A window popped from its frame and smashed onto a hillock of rubble below, and some in the crowd whooped. With a snap and a twang, a section of floor broke away, bringing down a strip of facade as it slumped, and the punters roared. The hoardings around the demolition site were covered in images of lush primordial greenery, overlaid with further inspiring slogans. Say farewell to the old, celebrate the new, Castle Park is coming, the next era in urban evolution, register your interest today.
Will Wiles reading from Plume. Thank you so much. Big round of applause. If you're just tuning in, this is author Will Wiles here at the Second Life Book Club. And this is a scene from his latest novel, Plume, where the attempt to get mugged for, to avoid a public relations disaster. These 2 guys want to get mugged and want to have it done on camera or audio and write about it, is going horribly wrong because a formerly quote unquote bad area is now a very, very hip area. And I remember, Will, that you have, I don't know if it's in that scene, but you're poking such delicious fun at PR and marketing speak. Somewhere in the book, there's a marketing slogan for one of those new developments, and I think it is all the grit, none of the grime. Is that in this one or?
Yeah, that's in Plume. Yeah, and there's quite a lot of property development stuff.
I mean,
a development called YOLO London is
that's right. You only live once, in case for the kids who don't know what that means. I mean, I learned it from my son. Yeah, and you can't. I mean, that is so delicious. Also, the PR people that are managing a disaster, an explosion here in the book. They also one of the PR people early on says words like yes or no are not precise. How does she get away with this? And you make a compelling case. I mean, I read through this like, yeah, she's not wrong.
Well, that's just sort of I mean, it's sophistry, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of intelligent intelligent sounding dissembling. I mean, that's one of my favorite scenes. I mean, it's kind of
well, there's a big.
I think the master of this sort of thing is. Sorry, carry on.
Let's just set it up real quick. There's a big explosion, and then the protagonists go there, and they want to find out more, and they ask very simple journalistic questions. Is the explosion dangerous? Are there toxic fumes? And the PR people who are tasked to manage this event, which they actually say it's an event. Yes, it's a disaster, but it's also an event. What's wrong with managing it? There's positive and negative events. They will not give a straight yes or no answer, and the PR boss of this group then makes this case that yes or no are actually not precise answers. Yeah, and it's bizarre. I mean, it reminded me of having a conversation with a troll online, basically.
Well, I mean, a lot of PR is a bit like that. I mean, part of that is, I thought it was a funny idea to assign a PR agency to a disaster anyway, and to have on-site PR professionals at the scene of a major emergency, ready to do that kind of rapid reaction stuff. But they're cases that when if they answered a question yes or no, what they're doing is confirming a load of prejudices or assumptions that you have in your mind about the meaning of the question that they can't necessarily be sure of. Whereas if they give an answer that isn't yes or no, but I think the answer they're giving is Londoners have no reason to be concerned. That's all they'll say. They're giving an information-rich and accurate answer that they can vouch for, which
And
is
it's
kind
also
of
emotionally satisfying because it contains words like nothing to be concerned about. There's a richness to it. It's like an eclair in a way.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's maybe I should have read that scene, but maybe later. But
It's so
uh,
good. People have to buy this book. This is an infomercial here with Will Wiles. As people know, this is a labor of love for me to discover a new author, or new for me, is always a pleasure. And Will, this stuff is really, I mean, it's really extraordinary. Very, very timely stuff too. Yeah.
but I mean, I think that scene. I mean, I think the master of that kind of thing is really Don DeLillo. I mean, he's
Yes.
can kind of
Yep.
play with that sort of concept so beautifully, and writing that whole scene with the PR agency for the disaster. I was constantly aware that it was sort of a pretty pale imitation of some of the extraordinary things that DeLillo does in his books with the airborne toxic event and so on.
Don't cut yourself short. I mean, Underworld is one of my favorite books, but I'm gonna put you right next to it in the shelf. If people are not familiar with Don DeLillo, please get. I mean, a short one is Cosmopolis. It's also fairly recent, and then Underworld is a big one. Those are my favorite ones. Will, can I ask you to go back to the sofa? I'm sorry, we're so regimented here at the book club. We have such regimented rundown procedures.
Yeah,
See?
it's fine.
What a wonderful bird, the cockatoo. And of course, the cockatoo plays a big part in Plume because the main protagonist has some problems with I guess hallucinations, I suppose, and he sees the cockatoo uh, quite often. Now, I would before Will reads another excerpt, I'm going to read a very quick one from his debut novel, and I have the wrong one in my hand. Care of Wooden Floors. Let me just change it here. Care of Wooden Floors. How would you set it up? This is your debut novel, and you took the plunge from a fairly secure job. I mean, I guess in the magazine business, right? And you told your wife, "I'm gonna become the next Don DeLillo, the British Don DeLillo," and she
Not
said,
quite. I mean,
"Sure."
I left my job after Care of Wooden Floors.
Hmm.
Had done pretty well. I mean, well enough to justify leaving my job. But so it wasn't before Care of Wooden Floors. But and I don't think I described myself as the next Care of the next Don DeLillo.
Also, I called you best-selling. What does best-selling even mean these days? I mean, how is that even calculated? I suspect that some publishers and publicists just put that on there. Or is that actually you have to be in the New York Times bestseller list, or is there a specific yardstick to apply here?
I well, I mean, I don't think I classify as a bestseller. I mean, yeah, New York Times would definitely, if you made it onto the New York Times list, which I haven't done, then that would be that would I think justify using it. I mean, anyone can use it. It's a question of how honest it is.
Hmm. Ah, there we go
I
again with
wouldn't
the truth.
I wouldn't use it about myself. I mean, they've done just fine. Care of Wooden Floors did very well, but it wasn't. I mean, in the UK, there's the Sunday Times, does top 20s of fiction and non-fiction paperbacks and hardbacks, and I think if you're going to be honest with yourself, you really should have appeared in one of those to describe yourself as a bestseller. But nowadays, people, if they appear at number one in an Amazon subcategory, then they
Ah,
feel that there's some justification.
right.
Um,
I see.
I don't know. I would feel uncomfortable about applying it to myself. In any case, basically.
But that's interesting. So you were yeah, you waited, you kept your day job. The care of wooden floors is a pretty crazy setup. Well, it's actually not that crazy. I mean, of two college friends, one has become a very successful composer in a unnamed Eastern European country, and the other one, the British person, is again a little bit on the procrastination side. What about this procrastination thing? Will, I'm supposed to ask you as a as a host, um, is how much of that is from you? Are you a master procrastinator?
Yeah, well, I certainly feel that way. I mean, I've always felt that procrastination was my greatest um, psychological inhibition. It's something I feel I battle with every single day, and I've been writing novels for 10 years now, and I've only written four, which feels like kind of amazing to me actually, because I feel like really if I wrote as little as I feel like I write, then I really wouldn't have written any, if you see what I mean. Because
Hmm.
it really feels like I spend my days writing absolutely nothing at all. It just comes very slowly to me, basically.
But
I
see,
mean, I
but
set
this is
myself
so,
targets, but
but
so
that's so.
four novels in about 10 years, which I suppose is an all right output, really. But it's a kind of daily struggle to keep myself honest and to keep myself moving forward. But maybe the periods of downtime are just part of my method. I don't know. I mean, it seems a bit sort of pseudish to talk about having a method, but yeah, I don't know. Everyone's different.
I think everybody has a method, and I also think that, I mean, from my vantage point here, I would say this is a good output at that quality. And again, I mean, it's interesting because I feel that's that same way, and then people tell me, "What? You are so incredibly productive. How do you even do it?" And I always feel I need to do more. And then when I suspect that, and I want to know if you feel the same way. If we're reflective, I mean, it's important to be honest about our own output and about our own shortcomings, and be able to analyze this. But at the same time, we also need to kind of exercise some, acknowledgement of the fact that the system, and you're right about this in every one of these books, the system is set up that uh, everybody is pretending to enjoying the treadmill. That everybody has no problem with being on this treadmill, and you know what? I want to actually go be on this treadmill 24/7. I don't care. I mean, this is reflected with the confrontations that people have in all of your books, and some people do that on purpose to make other people feel inadequate and feel bad. But overall, it's sort of a message that's drummed into us from early on. I mean, as a father, I find that very counterproductive. Um, how that's done in the German school system, to be honest. I mean, there's other ways to motivate people than to make them feel bad about their output.
Yeah, I think it could be something that could be writers could be a bit more uh, um, open about, without sort of ironic dissembling. Also about how much is done in the edit,
Hmm.
because I think it I rarely feel that things come very naturally to me, and when a passage, when a period of writing does come quite naturally to me, and it flows quite easily, I often end up being very dissatisfied with how it turns out. But
Hmm.
I think more often, I mean, it's kind of interesting that there aren't many books about procrastination when it's such an important part of a lot of writers' lives. There's a lot of books
You
about
mean
or
like as a
involving.
story? You mean like as a story because there's certainly plenty of
In,
self-help books.
Well, involve no, no. I mean, in novels. I mean, as a
Yeah,
feature in novels. I
yeah.
mean, because novelists suffer from it a great deal. But it's there's a lot of writer's block in novels. A lot of novels feature writers as characters, novelists as characters, and a lot of time they're dealing with writer's block. And writer's block is a kind of different problem. Writer's block has a sort of like the it's a sort of magic thing, isn't it? I mean, in the way that it's treated in novels anyway. There's some sort of creative problem that has to be resolved.
Right.
It's a question of locking and unlocking. Whereas procrastination isn't magic at all. It's an ugly, nasty psychological flaw. It's a kind of a sort of akin to laziness. It's not laziness because laziness is deliberately not doing anything, and procrastination is not being able to do anything because of some kind of inhibition.
Hmm.
They're both forms of avoidance, and to avoid things is a very negative activity. Whereas to be blocked is sort of like a wonderfully tragic state for your hero. Oh, how awful that my generally speaking, golden creative juices have been kinked in this way.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think a lot of cases which are described as writer's block are in fact just plain procrastination. They're not really block at all. I don't really think that writer's block it exists as a creative problem, or if it, I mean, it does exist, but I mean but there's there's ways of dealing with it. It's essentially just it's not a problem with your creativity. It's a problem with what you're creating. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's a problem in the writing that needs to be solved. You're not writing the right thing. Either there's something wrong in what you've already written, or there's something wrong in what's coming up.
But you're
Basically, in your head.
putting the finger on a huge challenge, or I think that one of the biggest challenges in the creative process is how long do I sort of keep at grinding away at this particular idea? How do I know that it is the wrong idea to pursue and abandon it and move to something else? I mean, I interviewed Liz Jensen, I mentioned it earlier, and she told me that she had abandoned 3 books that she was spending almost a year on each, and in hindsight it was necessary, and it was good, and something else came out. But how do you know this? I mean, after a while, I would say for me, you develop a certain intuitive sense. Um, shall I still keep at it? Am I almost close? Can I solve this problem, or do I have to move to something completely different?
I would say that for me anyway, and everyone's different. The problem of abandoning a novel wouldn't necessarily arise because it's by and large, I can't start writing a novel unless I've had the idea in mind for a very long time. It's only the persistent ideas, the ones the obsessions that make it into that I feel I can commit to, basically. And it's the thing that just won't go away. The nagging thought that has to be turned into a novel. So, I mean, I think by the time I started something like that, in earnest, I've already had it in mind for such a long time that I know that it's got the staying power in my mind, at least, to make it through to the end of the process. However, I mean, maybe this is it's kind of like the counterexample that proves the point about novels. But my life is surrounded by abandoned and ruined non-fiction projects, and I think that's because they don't have the same gestation. You don't spend ages thinking about them.
Hmm.
You come up with an idea, and there's a certain timeliness and so on. And I've had bad luck with them as well. And things blowing up or losing their contract or whatever for not through my own fault, but. I'm beginning to think I'm cursed in terms of non-fiction books, but the novels, have to have a certain staying power before you begin, in my experience anyway.
Mm.
You
And
have
that's the
to know
funda
that, they have to be that kind of obsessive thought.
right, that keeps coming, that is nagging you to pursue it. Um, and that's of course another interesting topic is what you write about, because your characters are working in sort of a short form, not short form, but in a more a form that demands frequent output, a magazine and such. And as I mentioned earlier, I worked in radio, and that suited me really well. And we did a local weekly show that was very highly produced and very labor intensive. And that kind of pressure to immediately after the show aired on Fridays to come up with a new show for the next Friday, that suits my personality. And then when I started doing long form documentary, it's a completely different challenge. And you also have to live a lot longer with that output, and it's scrutinized more. I wonder, because you worked in magazines, is that, do you need both sort of worlds, or do you feel more comfortable in the world of the project that takes a long time to see the go out into the public eye?
I've always felt that they might as well come out of completely different brains, quite frankly.
Hmm.
I used to write when I was working full time for a magazine. I would write Care of Wooden Floors in a notebook and on my lap in the morning, and I would feel and then go in and do a full day of work, writing stories for the magazine, and that never felt like it was. And then at the end of the day, on the train back, I would write it again, and it never felt that being tired of the magazine work, impaired novel work, and vice versa. If I
Hmm.
spend the way I try and divide my time is to do writing in the morning. I mean, novel writing in the morning, and then other things in the afternoon. And if I have journalism work to do in the afternoon, and I absolutely knacker myself with the novel writing in the morning, manage to do some sort of, like, for me, a phenomenal amount, which would be like 1,500 words or something like that.
Hmm.
Then and I think, phew, yeah, that was a huge morning's work. I'm exhausted now. Onto the journalism, and it just feels like it comes out of a different place. Being
Hmm.
being exhausted with one doesn't feel like being exhausted with the other. And the thing about journalism is it's much more it's a different discipline. It requires a kind of uh, prioritization of the first thought. You can't endlessly go back, and you don't have the reassurance that endless rounds of editing stretch out before you. You've got to be pretty confident in your first draft, and it has to. You have to invest um, time in something that's quite disposable as well, which is a kind of just different way of thinking about it. So I mean, it's kind of a bit of a rambling answer, but
No, no,
I've
no.
always
I
felt
mean,
that
but there's some people.
they might as well come out
Yeah,
of
yeah,
two completely different brains, as
yeah,
far as
yeah.
I'm concerned. I've never felt that one exhausts the other. Basically, they they
Mhm.
they they complement, if anything.
That's interesting. For me, the balance. I need to do some music in between, otherwise I'll go nuts.
Hmm.
I'm gonna read a quick excerpt that I love about Care of Wooden Floors, and this is about again the chap uh, who house sits for his very successful composer friend from college in this unnamed European country. He flies in, and he is not a connoisseur of classical music like his friend Oscar, who has this very elaborate apartment. Um, and by the way, all the books are floating around here on the ground, just like on the floor. Um, uh, his friend Oscar is a composer, and our main protagonist is here describing his relationship to classical music. So let me bring this up. Um, Here it is. All classical music is recognizable in a, "Oh, isn't this the tune from the Kenko advert?" way, but I knew that I had heard Death and the Maiden before, possibly from the Sigourney Weaver film, and The Trout turned out to be the theme tune to a BBC sitcom from the 1990s that I had only the faintest traces of memory. Thus culturally anchored, he's going to a concert that his friend Oscar says he should go, and reassured that I wasn't about to be exposed to some 2-hour experimental piece consisting of a crying baby and the sound of a shovel being dragged along a pavement, I was free to enjoy myself. Still, it was hard not to consider the nature of the psychological characteristic that others present possessed and I did not. The characteristic that meant their enjoyment was immersive and rapt, and mine was partial at best. When listening to classical music, I want to be able to read the paper at the same time or potter about. If forced to devote my attention wholly to the music, I wonder what I'm missing out on. What secret channel of sublimity I'm not receiving? What tiny disposition of cartilage in the inner ear means that classical music is little more than nice background noise to me? High quality oral wallpaper. Obliged to gaze upon this wallpaper for a couple of hours. My mind always turns to other things. And this is Care of Wooden Floors. And um, I love this. I majored in music. I'm a trained musician, as people know, and I love contemporary classical. And my father still hates it, and he still doesn't understand it. So it's awesome. Will Wiles is here at the Second Life Book Club, and we're completely off script. Um, and we're having a fantastic good time. The top of the hour has arrived. Usually we do only an hour stream and then do the rest as a in-world only post game. But I would suggest that we just do it all in one sitting. We have a huge audience on the stream, and everybody wants to hear more of Will. So if the in-world folks don't mind, in-world folks, you can ask questions in the chat, and I will pose them to Will. Just put them in the local
There
chat.
is a question here from Stella.
Yes. Stella says, "What has been your biggest challenge in character development in your stories?"
Um, well, I mean, in general, I mean, I find, character development, kind of comes out of the demands of the plot, and what I want my mannequins to do.
Your
But
avatars.
my avatars, yeah, that's a bit more, gives them a bit more luster than mannequins. But I my first three novels have all been about people learning things about themselves, but I guess most novels are about that, really. So it's not too illuminating a point to make. In terms of the particular sort of aspects of character development, I found challenging. Plume is a portrayal of alcoholism.
I
The
was
point of
gonna
view
say,
character is
yep.
an alcoholic, a functioning alcoholic, still technically, but is on a downward path, which was based on my own experience of alcoholism, and I wanted to try and accurately portray that the process of addiction as truthfully as possible, but also kind of give a sense of kind of how it feels, the sort of the logics of it that run through the head, the kind of polluted logic of addiction that runs through the addict's head, which is something I felt was a I don't know, it happened to me, and it was something that I wanted to try and portray truthfully, or at least in a way that resounded with, was recognized by people who had experienced the same thing, and so that was very challenging. In the way in my
But wait a
second
minute.
novel,
But I was going to ask you this. And thank you for being so open about this. So you had a problem with alcohol. So the issue is not here that you didn't know how this feels. The challenge for you was uh and I admire you for this to be so open about it with this character. Because it's a fascinating character, Jack Bick is. I mean, it's really it's wonderful, and to go deep into one's own personality and those issues and put them on the page, that must be really painful.
um, well, yes, I mean it was difficult. I mean it was often hard work, but I mean it wasn't. Um, I mean that's the huge benefit of fiction, is that it gives you a bit of arm's length,
Hmm.
deniability of things. I mean he does some revolting things as a result of his addiction. I mean, besides discreditable things as a person to do with lying and letting people down and so on. There's something about him straining blobs of mold out of a can of beer, and that didn't that I didn't do that, but there's something similar that did happen to me, which I won't go into. But it's kind of you want to kind of try and portray the sort of like just the sort of squalid everyday aspect of it, but not in a kind of depressing way, in a way that
Mm.
makes in a way that makes logical sense, because it's really everyone it's not a new thing to point out that addicts do kind of horrifying and degrading things to themselves, and which I know very well.
And they push away
But
people who
it, but
want
it,
to
but it,
help him. I think that's one of the
yeah,
aspects too that you're doing really well in this narrative, because he's surrounded by people who do want to help him. There's ample opportunity to go a different path, but he doesn't do it.
yeah.
It's not.
The logic of self destruction is interesting because I wanted to kind of explain it from the inside because I know how painful and upsetting it is to look at it from the outside, how inexplicable for a non-addict to see someone they love, affecting themselves like that. I know how painful and horrible that is. I've had that reflected back to me. And I felt that if I wanted to do one thing with Plume, it was to make a kind of testament of how it felt to be inside. But it is also a portrait of a man who's heading towards the moment of truth. Funnily enough, I mean, having talked about truth, what gets talked about in treatment and in popular culture as rock bottom. I mean, which is just a way of saying the moment where you kind of you wake up and you have your, again, another cliche of treatment, moment of clarity. You see yourself, you see what you're doing, and you see what it portends. The fact that you're going to die basically is the moment of clarity,
Mm.
and you wake up, or
Or you
you try
don't.
to do something about it, or you don't.
Mm.
Um, but that's kind of sort of what I wanted to portray as well. So the character um, unfolds towards that. But but that's kind of in a way was very difficult, but also quite easy because it was based on truth.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was based on true experience. I mean, not easy so much as it was a different kind of challenge. Whereas in the way in, I was writing a character who I was trying to make a genuine monster. He starts the book as I find a genuine monster, the protagonist of the way in. I wanted to sort of create a sort of like a sort of a shocking emptiness of a character, this sort of nihilist misanthrope who attends conferences for a living and has an utterly kind of like materialist view of human interaction. And I essentially wanted, besides being a kind of gothic monster story, which is what it is,
Hmm.
I wanted the way in to be a kind of story about a misanthrope and a misogynist learning that other people are real, basically.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, since we're talking about the way in, and Will, this is so I'm completely uh, off my prepared run sheet here, but this is absolutely wonderful. Why don't we read from the way in? As I said on the outset, that the way in is my favorite of three exceptional novels, but the way in is I just finished it late last night. Is an amazing story, as are the others. Um, and I would love for you to read a little bit, but if you please would set it up. I mean, what is the premise here? And there are some supernatural elements, which is actually a question I had for earlier, literary fiction versus genre fiction. And I had the folks from Influx Press here several months ago, and Gary Budden was chuckling a little bit. Well, what is literary fiction? And I'm looking at this book industry from a reader's perspective, and there's probably a lot of I can imagine a lot of you know infighting among the genres and among definitions and also some grievances. But is The Way In a horror novel? What is it?
yes, yeah,
Hmm.
no, it's definitely. I mean, um, it's not shelved with horror, but it was consciously written with horror as a model. I mean, it had I've always enjoyed horror and sort of weird tales and gothic tales as a reader. You know, they're something that I return to again and again, and I enjoy you know, writers like H.P. Lovecraft and
We enjoy him too.
William Beckford and so on. Hmm?
Without the racism, we still enjoy him.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, I mean, the racism is inescapable, sadly. But I mean, in terms of creation of atmosphere, you know, a lot of his work is quite you know, unique, and you know, it's the creation of frisson, of shudder, and what I wanted to do in The Way In was I wanted to create a gothic novel, and the gothic novel has a kind of like a whole load of baggage and connotations, and a whole sort of like dusty prop archive of stock effects and so on. And I wanted to create, essentially speaking, a gothic novel that had none of that. That had literally none of that. There was no there's no age to it. There's nothing ancient in it. There's nothing
mhm.
there's no creaky floorboards. There's no you know, there's no dark and stormy night. It's in a completely new building with Wi-Fi everywhere and branded coffee. And I wanted to see if you could create a sort of gothic, weird tale effect. And one of my an essay by the Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas called Junk Space, which is a sort of description of these seamless modern architectural environments, hotels, conference centers, shopping malls, airports, and so on, and the way that they endlessly blend together into what he calls a sort of fuzzy empire of seamless consumer interior experience. And this is a kind of interesting kind of like a piece of criticism in itself, a hugely readable and entertaining essay. But one of the entertaining things about it is the fact that it's kind of written in the same sort of like heightened, aghast style of an H.P. Lovecraft or an Edgar Allan Poe story. It's all mostly one run-on sentence, and it all has
Mhm.
this kind of air of a man who's glimpsed something horrifying, something beyond comprehension, and has been brought screaming back from the very brink of insanity. And even though he's describing carpets and shopping malls and so on. And so I kind of used that as I thought, well, you know, this is obviously the basis for a novel. How about if you take this literally and make a horror novel out of the modern chain hotel
I was
and kind of
I want to say real quick because this came up earlier before you dropped in, and I was telling the folks here as a warm up how cool the way in as a premise is, and I was mentioning hotels, and then Elf Biter was saying, well, an endless hotel that was done in weird in Star Trek and Weird Tales or something, and now Silas was saying The Shining.
yeah, The
Um,
Shining, yeah.
Now, let me tell you, as a reader, this has nothing to do with The Shining. Just because there's a hotel, first of all, it's a completely different hotel. Um, or the concept of a hotel, as Will was laying out, it's those types of chain hotels, and there's a lot more to it. But since this comes up, Will, when you formulate this idea, when this idea comes into your mind, here is a person who goes to these trade fairs, who loves to live in not in hotels that all look the same all over the world, a person who just picks up women and who loves the non-committal atmosphere of a hotel where you just sort of reinvent whoever you want to be, and all this kind of stuff. When you put this down, say I'm going to pursue this, how does it when does in your mind then, does the shining loom large and you go like, are you self-conscious about, oh god, I gotta differentiate my storyline, my characters from the shining as much as I can, or does that not even, is that sort of a blip on your radar screen? I
Right.
guess the sort of the
You
forcing
can't
to be original, I guess, is also a big artist can be a procrastinating force.
I
Or
mean, you can't write a horror story set in a hotel without thinking about The Shining. And I've, you know, obviously seen the film, and I've read the Stephen King novel as well. and it's one of the key things was it was in many ways exemplary for what I was trying to avoid about the Gothic novel, because it is the Gothic novel. I forget who described it this way, but the Gothic novel is about a victim, a victimizer, and and an atmospheric location. Basically, that's the sort of the triangle of elements in the Gothic novel: a victim, a victimizer, and an atmospheric location. And the Shining is the kind of classic Gothic setup because it is an isolated location. It's a location that it's off season. It's just the family in the hotel, and there is the classic victim and victimizer. The also in it derives its horror from and I'm not saying that I'm not criticizing it for this. I'm not saying it's bad for this, because it isn't. Both the novel and the movie are outstanding classics in their own ways. I'm just simply setting out my own stall. The Shining is based on ancient evil. The idea that the Indian the hotel is built on a sacred site, that it's played host to all sorts of horrifying events over its long history, and this has accumulated into this sort of psychic load that exerts itself over and over again. That's exactly the kind of sort of Gothic kind of setup that I wanted to get away from. There is no psychic imprint for the hotel in The Way In. It is entirely new. There's still plastic on some of the furniture, and the location is so nondescript that it's not even described. It's just on a motorway at the edge of somewhere, the edge of an edge, and it's a complete brownfield site, a greenfield site, an emptiness. There's no ancient evil, and the question of who is victim and who is victimizer is deliberately confused. There is a sort of a minotaur, as it were, but it's but it's rendered. The book opens with a quote from Borges from the House of Asterion, which is his remarkable description of what the minotaur might be thinking. But it's I should say that what I had often in mind was the way that Kubrick altered King's novel, because one of the interesting things, if you look at Kubrick's notes about how to adapt The Shining, he has this fantastic page of I think it's location notes or something, where or a manuscript from the novel, where one of King's scenes, the potential for filming one of King's scenes is discussed, and he lists in the margin all the different devices used to create suspense in the novel and in haunted hotel novels in general, which are things like lights going on and off, and floorboards creaking and things like that. And what's striking about this list is you rather think he's enumerating things he might put in his film, is that none of them appear in The Shining. He creates in The Shining, the film. He creates a completely new sort of horror vocabulary in some ways,
so he was he wanted to really remind himself to avoid all those tropes.
Yeah, he was trying to avoid cliches, and that's sort of what I'm trying to do as well. I mean, so sure.
Well, and yeah, you invented a new one. Actually, that is actually not. I mean, this did happen to me, and I think other people may too, which is the malfunctioning hotel owned alarm clock that drives you nuts. That is the biggest horror in the whole thing.
Horror. I mean, hotels have got sort of like you're in a kind of like very sort of cybernetic environment. It's not like your home. It's the whole environment feels like this sort of bubble of simulation that has to be kind of like very carefully fine tuned when you get into it.
But
adjusting the air conditioning, and figuring out how the lights work and setting the alarm clock and so on.
Right.
There's all this kind of like tweaking you have to do to kind of tune yourself in. That feels very much like almost like kind of making a bargain with a not even with a building, because it's with a building systems. It's talking with some sort of cybernetic entity that lies behind it, and that was kind of what I was trying to get into. So it's not it's not a haunted house, as it were. It's a kind of it was an effort to kind of create a sort of cosmic horror that
I I I
stems out of the hotelness of hotels.
I, I
Um,
want to mention here, Ruby says in the chat, having worked at a hotel, one would be surprised at the subtle horror stories of the daily life. I have never worked at a hotel, but I always very friendly with staff, and I frequently go to the same chain hotels now that we don't live in California anymore. Which is strange because that's also why the novel resonated with me so much, Will, is that I got reminded. I mean, I had a nightmare tonight about an endless corridor and that I couldn't find the lobby anymore. I mean, it was pretty yeah, it was horrific because of your book. If you want to go to the perch up front and read us a little bit, and I'm going to read a tiny little excerpt of The Way In. In German, the German title is Kein Leben ohne Minibar, which is interesting. The translation of that would be no life without a minibar. Do you approve of this translation, Will?
I
I,
think
um,
I mean I'm afraid I can't read German, so I can't comment on translation overall.
no, yeah, but the title
I
the
have immense
title
respect for
is
translators. They do extraordinary work,
if
and from their lists of queries to resolve ambiguities in my text, I know the level of detail that they think about. They think about how to render things in a different language. It's the most remarkable discipline. I have to say that I was never consulted about that title change, and I do feel a bit sore about that because it's not a
yeah,
title I would have chosen.
yeah. That
But that feels like a marketing decision rather than a translator decision to me.
i- yeah, I would say so too. And because I've read Plume, I can only say the very best of this particular translator because she does capture what I perceive as your very distinctive um style. But that is the title, and that may be a German thing. I mean, there's a long list of movie titles in Germany that are bizarrely translated in a completely different way from the English title. Um, the oh yeah, the cover is here in the back with the quarter. There's a lot of different covers of The Way In, and you actually find them here on the table here. There's several different ones I have here. Um, And of course, the magic of Second Life is such that Will has the German translation in front of him right now. Here's an avatar. But the magic of Second Life is such that Will can read from the German one and it will come out of his cockatoo's mouth in English. I'm going to just read a tiny little paragraph. Here, the main protagonist, Neil Double, is describing why he loves hotels so much. And one part of it is the shower. And I agree. Here is this sequence. The hotel shower. Even though I spent most of my life in hotels, I still revered their showers. Hot water at a pressure that scoured the skin. Clean, dry washcloths and towel. No fungus or grime between the tiles. The bright white light of a NASA dust-free lab. Not to forget the little individual soaps and bottles of shampoo that so impress people unaccustomed to hotels. Though those are just part of the greater truth of the hotel shower. The whole experience is like one of those little bottles. It is used only once or twice, then replaced. Every day the whole shower is reset by invisible staff as if you had never been in it. In your shower at home, your repeated visits will eventually accumulate, and you must continually clean the unit. So I love that. And but still, if you ever go to Orange County, California, and you go into one of these office parks around the airport there, Ronald Reagan Airport. Is it Ronald Reagan Airport? Uh, yeah, this is, I think, the scene that this is the setting of your book in a way. So yeah, Will, what are you reading for us?
Sorry, I turned off my
There we
microphone
go.
so you wouldn't get typing sounds. From the way in, I was going to read a description of the conference in the conference hall.
Yeah, and let's remind people that the main protagonist, what he does, his business is he goes to conferences, trade fairs, and he offers a service for people who don't want to go there. He's basically their avatar. That send Neil Double to these conferences, and then he summarizes. He goes to the meetings, he goes to the presentations, and then he files a report for busy executives who don't want to go there, and they pay him the money, um, and so they don't have to go there. And this is a subtext of the book here, which we talked about earlier, is presence in these conferences. Is it really required, or is it just sort of something that you can write off as an expense and then have an extramarital affair on top of it and whatnot? So please,
Yeah,
Will.
he's a conference surrogate. He describes himself as a sort of flesh avatar. So if you don't want to attend a boring conference, you can send him instead, and he can attend on behalf of lots of other people. Um, uh, um, he could yeah. But this is he's essentially attending the Moby Dick of his profession, which is
Oh,
a
that's right. Yeah.
he's attending Meetex, which is a conference for the people who organize conferences.
The conference
So
of all conferences. Oh my
he's
God. Yes.
he's in the conference of conference organizers, which is so I mean recursion is and mirrors and so on are fairly well recurring kind of like themes in it. But anyway, that was what I was going to describe. A conference of conference organizers, a meeting of the meetings industry. And they all knew the recursive nature of their gathering here. They all joked about it, essentially telling the same joke over and over, draining it of meaning until it was nothing more than a ritualized husk. But they laugh all the same. Just a conference of conference organizers, one among many. Meetex joins EIBTM, IMEX, ICOMEX, EMIF, and Conflex on the calendar. And those will all include the same jokes and talk the same small talk, redundancy piled on redundancy, spread out across the globe. Those are all real conferences, incidentally. Meetex isn't real, but the other ones, EIBTM, IMX, ICOMEX, EMIF, and Conflex, are all real conferences. This repetition proliferating year after year was enough to bring on a headache. And indeed, a headache had stirred since I'd left the hotel, accelerated perhaps by the stuffy bus and its throbbing engine, its boomerang route, the swinging 360-degree turn it had made around the motorway junction. Hosting Meetex was a smart move by the Meta Center. This space, which could swallow aircraft hangars whole, was in a way the biggest stall of the fair, advertising its services to the people who, captivated by the quality of its quality as a venue, captivated by its quality as a venue, would fill it with gatherings of other industries in the coming years. The airport, the motorway, the convenience, the state-of-the-art facilities, the thousands of enclosed square meters, a space without architecture, without nature, where everything outside is held at bay and there is no inside, no edges, the breeze-block walls too distant to see, a blankness above the steel frame supporting scores of lights. But inside this hall was a space with too much design. The fair, the exhibitors, all exhibiting. It was an assault on the eyes, a chaos of detail, several hundred simultaneous demands on your attention. And it was active. It came to you with bleached teeth and a tight t-shirt. Many stands were attended by attractive young women, brightly dressed and full of vim. There must be an inoffensive technical term for them, perhaps along the lines of brand image enhancement agents, but they are mostly referred to as booth babes. They jump out at you, try to coax you into a game or join a list, or they hand you a flyer or a low-value freebie like a USB stick or a tote bag. Combined, these multitudinous pleas, each an invitation to enter a different corporate mental universe and devote yourself to it, invitations that are a product of enormous investments of time and money and creativity, formed a barrage of imagery and information and signs and symbols that at first challenged the brain's ability to process its surroundings, becoming an undifferentiated blaze of visual abundance, overwhelming our monkey apparatus like lens flare, which is precisely the point. It was in the interests of the organizers and the host to dazzle you, to leave you with the impression that there's not just enough on show, there's more than enough, far more than enough, a stupefying level of surplus. For a fair to imply that it might have its limits is anathema. That's why they must rain down the stats and the superlatives, the square meters and the daily footfall, the record numbers of this and that. What other industry stressed that its product was near impossible to consume? No wonder my services were needed. It wasn't impossible to see a whole show scale, but it was difficult. It took work. You had to be systematic, go aisle by aisle, moving up the hall in a zigzag, giving every stand some time, but not so much that it diminished the time given to others. This used to be my approach, but I found that route planning and time management occupied more of my thoughts than the content of the show itself. I was lost in the game of trying to see every stand, note every new product, and expose myself to every scrap of stimuli. The show as a whole left only a shallow track in my memory. And my reports were similarly shallow. They were even-handed but lacked any texture. They were mere aggregations of data. In being systematic, I saw only my own system. Completism was blindness. It yielded only a partial view. After a year of trudging around fairs in this manner, I realized that my reports were formulaic and stale, full of ritual phrases and repeated structures, and the entire point of the endeavor was to spare clients that endless repetition. They employed me because they already knew the routine aspects of these fairs and didn't care to know them. What they wanted was something else. So I threw away my diligent systems and timetables and started to truly explore. Today was typical of my current method of not having a method. I would strike out into the center of the hall, ignoring all pleas and distractions, and from there walk without direction. I would try to drift, to allow myself to be carried by the current and eddies of the hall, thinking only in the moment, watching and following the people around me. Beyond that, I tried to think as little as possible about my overall aims, and as much as possible about what was in front of me at a given time. I would give myself to the experience, but keep my notes sparse, take a few photographs. It's not it's not easy to be purposefully random, but it pays. Once I started taking this approach, my reports became colorful and impressionistic. They were filled with telling details and quirky insights. The imperfection of memory became a strength. The stands passed by hawking bulk name tags, audiovisual equipment, seating systems, serviced office space, not just office space, all kinds of space are packaged and marketed here, and places too. You can get a good deal, a great deal, on Vietnamese-made wholesale tote bags at Meatex, but what it and its competitors mostly trade in is destinations, cities, regions, countries. All were ideal for your event, whether they were Roslav, Arizona, or Sri Lanka, or Taipei, or Oaxaca, or Israel. All combined history and modernity. All were the accessible crossroads of their part of the world. All were gateways and hearts. All had state-of-the-art facilities that could be relied upon. All had luxurious yet affordable hotels. Most importantly, all of these hundreds of places across the road were distinctive, unique, and outstanding, consistently, uniformly so. These comfortable, cost-effective hotels and state-of-the-art facilities were also present at Meatex. Other conference centres promoted themselves, boasting of the inexhaustible square kilometres they had available on scores of city outskirts. Within a giant space, I was being coaxed to other giant spaces, a fractal shed world, halls within halls within halls. Another section was devoted to the chain hotels, and its promises of pampering and revitalization were hard to bear. Women wrapped in blinding white towels, cucumber slices over eyes, men, ties AWOL, drinking beer in vibrant bars, couples clinking capacious wine glasses over gourmet meals, clean linen, gleaming bathrooms, spectacular views. These were highly seductive images for me. I wanted to be back at the hotel, reclining on the bed, taking a long shower, ordering a room service meal, perhaps with some wine thrown in. It mattered little that the images were total fiction, posed by models, supplied by stock photo agencies, the gourmet food made of plastic, the views computer-generated, the bar a stage set. The desire they generated was real. Meatex was dominated by these deceitful images, defined by them. The location on sale is an immaterial. The picture, the money shot, is nearly identical everywhere. A gender-mixed, multicultural group unites around an arm outstretched, gap-bridging handshake, glorying in it. Game show smiles all round, with an ancient monument or expressive work of modern architecture as the backdrop. Business! Being done! The transcendent, holy moment when the deal is struck. Everyone profits, and in unique, iconic, spectacular avant-garde surroundings. Heaving with antiquities and avant-garde structures, the people bland and attractive, their skin tones a tolerant variety, but all much alike, looking as if they had just agreed the sale of the world's funniest and most tasteful joke while standing in the lobby of a Zaha Hadid museum. Leave it there.
Will, this is absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reading. Silas is saying when two authors are there, people should read from each other's book. That's not a bad idea. But when we have one author, I am in heaven when they read from their own work. I mean, it's just wonderful, Will. And and here, what is so interesting. you're describing well, the protagonist Neil Double is describing this total conformity of these hotels, right? And he enjoys that. But there's this other character, and I found this quite profound. The other character, Maurice, who is kind of a little bit disheveled, you can sort of imagine the typical hardworking journalist who has a little rumpled shirt there, but he does a good job. He goes there and he interviews people. He files his stories on time, and Neil Double, the main protagonist, who loves this conformity, this replaceability that is so sold as something unique, but it's all the same as you read here in this excerpt. This guy Maurice um, says that yeah, all this stuff is the same, but people are different. People are interesting. I found that was actually really profound. So they both inhabit the same space, and the main character Neil, and he goes through a big transformation too. He becomes a much better person. Is very jaded, very cynical, and Maurice kind of is not.
Yeah, he's a a deliberately contrasting voice or presence, sort of a far more human and recognizable presence than the uh, protagonist, who at least at the start of the novel is this fairly ghastly drone, um, uh, who's very much committed to this world without any human connections, and Maurice is sort of a much more human and warm sort of counterpoint to that, and I suppose tellingly, the protagonist spends most of the first half of the book avoiding and insulting him,
Yeah,
trying to get out of his way.
yeah.
Finds him intolerable.
We are completely out of time. This is so amazing, Will. Thank you so much for coming. And if there are audience questions, please shoot. Silas, I'm not going to read your comment because I think it's totally off base. And besides the point, there's a lot of just the last 20 shows that we had here with authors, and every one author who came here and read his own stuff is an absolute delight. Uh, to be quite brutally honest, here on a live show, I have no idea what you're talking about, Silas, so I'm not going to read this comment. Um, but if other people have any questions for Will, usually we do a post game, but we're out of time. So please put your questions in the local chat. Um, I do have a question about Hunter S. Thompson because I just heard a radio story on him. Hunter S. Thompson, American journalist and novelist, very well known through his work about the Hells Angels and the Kentucky Derby. I believe was his first one in the 60s, and then of course the big movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas based on his book. And he also said, "Truth is a lie." I think that's a direct quote of his, and I don't know if he was one of the first ones who was sort of mixing, inserting himself into that. I wonder if Hunter S. Thompson is a big hero of yours, Will.
Yeah, I mean he's a was someone I definitely revered when I was younger, and still enjoy a lot of his work a
Hmm.
great deal. I mean, he's an interesting writer because he's hugely impressive to I mean in particular to young male authors, as he was
Hmm.
hugely or
Right,
writers
because he had a
hugely
gun.
writers.
I'm actually throwing up a picture here on his property with his pointing his gun.
Well, because
He's
he had such a free and he has such a free and funny and unique style. I mean,
right.
he gives this impression of being completely free with his style, and being kind of outrageous and funny, and all the more honest for it.
Yeah.
That sort of Gonzo voice is, I think, hugely impressive, in particular to like I say, young male writers. However, I think it is kind of a bit of a dangerous role model, as it were. I mean, even Hunter S. Thompson couldn't write like Hunter S. Thompson um, all the time, as you discover when you when you when you read more of his work beyond just Fear and Loathing and the particular high points, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72, for instance, begins in that kind of very familiar pyrotechnic sort of Gonzo style, and then gets lost in terrible thickets of introspection and meandering and so on, and goes on for
Where he
far longer
follows
than
the campaign Nixon versus McGovern. Yeah, but you know,
so I'm saying,
mhm.
he makes a sort of poor role model. It's an unsustainable role model for writers. I mean, it's a fantastic,
But
you
you're
know,
talking about style. But I'm curious because in his role and German Public Radio had a great reportage just a few days ago, and one of the people interviewed in that reportage was saying that we need a Hunter S. Thompson today, as a balance to this sort of obsession with both sides and this objectivity. And somebody else who was interviewed said, I'm not so sure if that's good. I mean, Hunter S. Thompson had a good moral and ethical, solid ethical sort of views that I agree with, certainly. And so him inserting himself with is not a problem. But how do you feel about this, inserting yourself into the story like this, and taking a very clear side?
uh, well,
Probably depends on what the piece
as
is
a
about.
practice in journalism,
Yes.
I think it's got its merits. I think the problem is that we live in a world where the media environment has become you know saturated with actors who see themselves as actors, who are and who are engaged in deliberately performing within a media um, narr- narrative, as it were. I mean,
Yeah.
a figure like Trump is a sort of a Gonzo figure in himself. Who is able to maintain command of narratives simply by spewing out hateful non sequiturs. Basically, it's he's very he's a disruptive figure in himself. I mean, the brilliant thing about the anarchic style of Hunter S. Thompson was it was set against the horrible, stiff corruption of Richard Nixon, which was a very different model, a very different antagonist for him to go up against.
Hmm.
Um, and the sort of the ghastly slickness of the Reagan years and what followed. I'm not entirely sure if exactly the same approach, if he was still with us, and I wish he still was, would necessarily work in the, in the Trump era. Whether it would be effective, or
Well, I
whether
mean,
it would
I
simply
could.
be more chaos
Right.
against a demagogue who thrives on chaos. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally see, and that's a very good point. I'm just thinking in this, and that's certainly not true for every outlet. But what I also observe in Germany, what is so frustrating is, especially with climate coverage, there is a sort of, to me, a very outdated model of this. So both sides need to be heard. I mean, it's not as extreme as in some U.S. outlets, and I'm painting with a broad brush here. It's more nuanced than that. But in general, some of the traditional, even public broadcasting, they generally do a good job. They have this objectivity obsession with a perceived objectivity, as we talked about it earlier, that they is unhelpful in the current time, I think.
Yes,
With
the false
Yeah,
balance.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
guess that's
I
the
think.
long-winded way of saying exactly that. Yes.
Yeah, no. I mean, yeah. Well, I just summarizing, as it were. I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah. That's the same. Um, yeah, that's particularly a problem, as you say, with climate science, where there is an overwhelming scientific consensus that that something is desperately, urgently wrong and needs to be done something, and a lot of opaquely funded interests who would dearly like there to be a bit more of debate about it. you know, and a media environment where it only takes one wrong person in a room full of right people to make a make a consensus into a debate, um,
I wonder
and
if,
it's
yeah.
yeah, and it's I guess yeah, it's a tricky one. I think there's also the question of the people view a media ecosystem as being an automatic spectrum, if you see what I mean.
Yes,
They
absolutely.
see the half dozen British daily newspapers and arrange them neatly spaced out on a grid, whereas in
Yes.
fact in Britain's case, there are four or five of them are tilted way over to the right, and then there's a couple that are sort of more in the liberal left direction. It's not a spectrum at all.
Mm.
That's another kind of form of false balance.
Completely agreed, and we could talk for hours. Will, this is such a delight, and I apologize for stepping on you here and there. I got a comment here from Mauka Showers. Uh, she says, "Jesus effing Christ, can Drax go even for a full minute without interrupting the guest?" I totally apologize, but it's sometimes hard without um, more other audible cues. I'm defensive here, and I apologize, and I will do better, Mauka. I will do better. I'm just so excited that Will is here. I'm just an excitable 16-year-old, and I watch too much Jiminy Glick, Martin Short as Jiminy Glick. Um, if you want to have comedic relief, watch that. Maybe you subconsciously I absorbed his style. Um, Will, thank you, and my audience here, of course. Um, knows that we must support writers by actually purchasing books. Nobody cares if you read them, just buy them, put them in the shelf. No, actually, you should read them too. But, supporting the art of writing is through purchasing the books and not, downloading illegal ebooks and such things. So thank you for a wonderful audience today. Many familiar faces. I'm really excited about building a community. Many new faces as well. Large audience on the streams. And Will, yes, it's time for dancing. Come on, Will. Yes, Will is giving us some dance. Um, thank you also, Strawberry Linden. I don't know if Strawberry is here. Strawberry normally produces the program, but today we have Isabel Sharon running the camera, producing. And thank you so much, Isabel. Big thanks to Brett and Patch from Linden Lab. All the moles at Linden Lab. Marianne McCann customizes the venue. Silas makes wonderful avatars. Kralos customizes avatars. Did I forget someone? I'm sure I forgot someone. Please help me out. Big announcement. I said at the beginning of the show, in a couple of weeks, we have a museum of all the guests who came here with clickable little interactive thingies and books to throw around and floating books and whatnot to have a little sort of a playful place where people also get a sense of who we already had on. Let's see here, the back channel. I just got a message from Brett in the back channel. Uh, Brett asked me, "Did you thank me?" Yes, I did. No, he didn't. Um, reading list will be out in a couple of hours. Then next week, yes, right. Next week we have Margie Preuss, and please observe the backdrop here. I'm changing the image. Margie Preuss is, of course, uh, a well-known American writer for young adult novels. Big fan, and she has a new one out, Village of Scoundrels, and we'll talk about that and um, her body of work. And that's it. And I'll see you all next week, next Wednesday, at 12 o'clock at the Second Life Book Club.